I only borrowed an old book from the shelf in his study, a blue cloth-bound volume my mother never touched. I never expected that blow would open a door. Between yellowed pages lay handwritten notes and a notarized document tucked inside, something that could burn down Halpert Development in a single afternoon. He thought I was just the gentle stepdaughter, working night shifts at the hospital, weak and dependent. He forgot I'm the keeper of history, every receipt, every message, every pencil mark in the margins. If not for that blow, I wouldn't have known the book was a family safe in paper form, and the key to revenge lay right on page 214. Only one question remained. Where would I burn him? In the boardroom or before the probate judge? My name is Maren Ellison, and at 34, I've learned that family isn't always what it seems. I work the night shift as a medical nurse at Rivergate Medical in Westbrook, coming home each morning to a house that feels more like a corporate office than a home. My mother, Diane, married Roy Halpert 3 years ago, and since then, our lives have been governed by what he calls the Halpert household rules. Roy owns Halpert Development, one of the largest construction companies in Westbrook. He's the kind of man who wears his success like armor, custom suits, gold cufflinks, and a smile that never reaches his eyes. When he married my mother, he didn't just take her as his wife. He took control of everything: keys, safes, mail, property documents. Everything flows through his hands first. He installed a filing system in what used to be our family room, complete with locked cabinets and color-coded folders. I moved back home temporarily after Mom's hip surgery last spring. The plan was simple: help with her recovery, save money from my nursing salary, and buy my own place within a year. But Roy made it clear from day one that I was an unwelcome guest in what he now considered his house. "Your mother and I have systems in place," he'd say whenever I tried to help with household matters. "Medical professionals should stick to medicine." The contempt in his voice was always barely concealed. To him, I was just another expense, a burden disrupting his perfectly controlled environment. He especially hated when I touched the paperwork, whether it was mail on the counter or documents in his study. His study was his sanctuary, a dark paneled room that smelled of leather and expensive whiskey. Along one wall stood an antique oak bookshelf, filled with first editions and business journals. Most were for show, pristine spines that had never been cracked, but there was one section, lower left, with older books, volumes from before he married Mom, including some that had belonged to my grandmother. Mom had become a shadow of herself under Roy's rule. Where she once managed her own rental properties and investment portfolio, she now needed his permission to write a check over $50. He'd convinced her it was easier this way, that he was protecting our family's financial future. She believed him, or pretended to, especially after the surgery when the pain medication made everything fuzzy. I watched him isolate her from her old financial advisor, her lawyer, even her accountant. "Why pay all these people when Barton and Pierce can handle everything?" he'd said, referring to his personal law firm. One by one, every professional who'd helped my mother build her modest wealth was replaced by someone from Roy's network. The house itself had transformed under his ownership. What was once our cozy family home now featured security cameras, a sophisticated alarm system, and locks on doors that never needed them before. Even the kitchen pantry required a key. Roy claimed it was for inventory control and household efficiency. But it was the bookshelf in his study that would change everything. Among those old volumes sat a blue cloth-bound book, The Tides of Westbrook, a self-published local history that had belonged to my grandmother. I'd seen Mom flip through it years ago, pointing out familiar family names in its pages. Now it sat forgotten on Roy's shelf, a relic from before his regime. I should have known better than to borrow it, but working nights meant long, quiet hours, and I'd run out of reading material. What harm could come from borrowing one old book that clearly hadn't been touched in years? I was about to learn that in Roy Halpert's world, everything had a price, and some prices were higher than others. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd just woken up after my night shift, and the house was quiet. Mom was at her physical therapy appointment, and Roy was supposedly at the office. I made myself coffee and wandered into his study, drawn by the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The blue cloth-bound book seemed to call to me from its spot on the lower shelf. The Tides of Westbrook. I remembered Grandma reading passages aloud when I was young, stories about the founding families and the old lakeside communities. I reached for it carefully, noting the dust along its spine. Roy clearly hadn't touched it. I was sitting in the kitchen, book open to a chapter about Edgewater Lake, when I heard his car in the driveway. My first instinct was to return the book, but it was too late. Roy walked in earlier than expected, his face already tight with whatever had gone wrong at the office. His eyes found the book immediately. "What the hell is that?" "Just one of Grandma's old books," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "From my study?" His voice dropped to that dangerous quiet tone I'd learned to fear. "You went into my study?" The door was open. I didn't think. The slap came fast, his palm connecting with my cheek hard enough to snap my head sideways. As I stumbled, his fist caught my shoulder, sending me into the kitchen counter. The book fell from my hands, landing face down on the tile floor. "You don't touch anything in that room," he snarled. "Nothing. Do you understand?" I pressed my hand to my burning cheek, tasting copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. But as I bent to retrieve the book, something caught my eye. The back cover had partially separated from the binding, and tucked inside the cloth lining was a folded document. Roy was already storming back to his study, muttering about changing the locks. With shaking hands, I carefully extracted the paper. It was a notarized document, dated 3 years ago, just 2 months before Mom married Roy. Deed of gift. Property, Edgewater Lake House, 445 Shore Drive, Westbrook. Grantor, Eleanor Marsh, my grandmother. Grantee, Marin Elizabeth Ellison. My heart stopped. I read it again, then a third time. The language was clear. The lake house was gifted to me as separate property, not to be commingled with any marital estate of the grantee. But that couldn't be right. Roy had been using the lake house as collateral for his business loans. I'd overheard him on calls, discussing the Edgewater property as part of his asset portfolio. Mom had mentioned something about signing papers to simplify the ownership structure. I flipped through the book's pages with trembling fingers. There, in the margins of page 214, were pencil notations in Roy's handwriting. Transfer scheduled 3:15. First National, 2.3 M approved against Edgewater. D signed POA, 3/12, post-surgery, perfect timing. My stomach churned. March 12th was 2 days after Mom's hip surgery, when she was still foggy from pain medication. POA, power of attorney. He'd gotten her to sign over financial power of attorney while she was drugged. I photographed every page, every notation, and most importantly, the deed of gift. Then I carefully returned the document to its hiding place and shelved the book exactly where I'd found it. My cheek throbbed, and my shoulder ached, but my mind was racing. Roy Halpert had built his empire on a foundation of lies, and he'd used my grandmother's gift, my inheritance, as his personal piggy bank. He'd manipulated my mother at her most vulnerable moment, turning her into an unwitting accomplice in what looked increasingly like fraud. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was normal. I iced my face, covered the bruise with makeup, and went to work my night shift as usual. But during every quiet moment, I studied those photos on my phone, piecing together the full scope of Roy's deception. He thought that slap would teach me a lesson about staying in my place. He was right. It did. It taught me that the man who'd taken over our lives was more than just controlling. He was a criminal. And thanks to his violence, I now had everything I needed to prove it. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own home. Working night shifts gave me the perfect cover. Roy assumed I was sleeping during the day while he was at the office. Instead, I was building a case. The power of attorney document was the key to his scheme. I found a copy in his filing cabinet, signed by my mother on March 12th, witnessed by 2 employees from Halpert Development. The timing was criminal. Mom had been on a cocktail of post-surgical medications including Percocet and Ambien. Any first-year law student could argue she lacked the mental capacity to sign legal documents. But Roy's system went deeper than one forged authorization. He'd created an entire ecosystem to shield his activities. Barton and Pierce, his law firm, had drafted all the documents. His internal accountant, Marcus Webb, had signed off on every transaction. The board of directors at Halpert Development, mostly his golf buddies and drinking partners, had rubber-stamped the use of the Halpert family properties as collateral without asking questions. I started documenting everything: photos of receipts showing Mom's medication schedule, screenshots of Roy's emails from Mom's computer, where he'd saved drafts about consolidating the family assets for tax purposes, calendar entries showing board meetings where they'd discussed refinancing against the Edgewater property for the new Riverside Lofts project. The most damning evidence came from Roy himself. He was careless in his arrogance, leaving financial documents on his desk, taking calls on speaker while I was supposedly asleep upstairs. I recorded him telling his banker, "The lake house gives us another $2.3 million in borrowing power. Diane's fully on board. Signed everything last month." One afternoon, I found the smoking gun, a draft email on his computer to his lawyer. "Need to expedite the Edgewater title transfer. M. Doesn't know about the gift deed. If she finds out before we complete the consolidation, we'll need to pursue the mental incompetence angle for E.M. at time of gifting." E.M. My grandmother, Eleanor Marsh. He was preparing to challenge my grandmother's mental capacity when she'd gifted me the property, just in case I discovered the truth. The man had contingency plans for his lies. I printed everything, storing copies in a safety deposit box at a bank across town where Roy had no connections. But I needed more than evidence. I needed a strategy. The Riverside Lofts project was Roy's baby, a $30 million mixed-use development that would cement Halpert Development as a major player in the state. The financing was complex, leveraged against multiple properties including family assets. The groundbreaking was scheduled for next month, with investors from 3 states already committed. What Roy didn't know was that his house of cards had a fatal flaw. Every loan document, every investor presentation, every SEC filing listed the Edgewater property as a company asset. But according to the deed of gift gathering dust in that blue book, the lake house had never belonged to the marital estate. It was mine, gifted before Mom's marriage, explicitly protected from any marital commingling, which meant every financial document Roy had filed was fraudulent. Every loan secured against the Edgewater property was based on a lie. Every representation to investors about the company's assets was material misrepresentation. I studied corporate law at night between patient rounds, learning about related party transaction disclosures and fiduciary duties. In his rush to empire build, Roy had violated nearly every principle of corporate governance. The board's failure to verify ownership of collateral assets wasn't just negligent, it was potentially criminal. The final piece of the puzzle came when I examined the deed of gift more carefully. The notary seal belonged to Andrew Lowell, and the witness signature was his as well. I recognized the name. Mr. Lowell lived 3 blocks away, the elderly man who walked his beagle every morning. Mom mentioned once that he'd been a notary and legal secretary before retiring. If I could get Mr. Lowell to verify the authenticity of the document, I'd have an unimpeachable witness, someone who could testify that my grandmother was of sound mind when she made the gift, that the deed was properly executed, and that it predated any claims Roy might have. I spent hours creating a timeline, a flowchart showing how Roy had systematically defrauded not just my family, but his investors, his lenders, and potentially the SEC. Each arrow led back to that March day when he'd extracted a power of attorney from my drugged mother. The bruise on my face had faded to yellow, but my resolve had only hardened. Roy Halpert thought he was untouchable, protected by his wealth and connections. He was about to learn that paperwork, his own obsessive documentation, would be his downfall. And it all started with a book he'd never bothered to open, Building an Alliance Against Roy Halpert, required careful selection. I started with Kara Winters, the charge nurse on my unit. She'd noticed the bruise despite my makeup and had quietly slipped me a domestic violence pamphlet. When I told her I needed legal help for a family financial matter, she didn't hesitate. "My cousin Dee works at Harbor Women's Advocacy," Kara said during our break. "They do more than just DV cases. They handle financial abuse, elder exploitation, all of it, pro bono if you qualify." I met Dee Park at a coffee shop downtown, far from Roy's usual haunts. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses. When I laid out the documents, the deed of gift, the POA signed under medication, Roy's margin notes, she leaned back and whistled low. "This is bigger than financial abuse," she said. "This is corporate fraud. Possible RICO if he used interstate banking. But first, we need to verify that deed." Which brought me to Mr. Lowell. I approached him during his morning walk, his Beagle Max sniffing at my shoes. When I mentioned my grandmother Eleanor Marsh, his weathered face lit up. "Eleanor was a force of nature," he said. "Sharp as a tack until the end. I remember that day clearly. She insisted on gifting you the lake house, said she wanted it protected, kept in the family through you." "Would you be willing to swear to that?" I asked. He straightened, suddenly looking less like a retiree and more like the legal professional he'd been. "I kept copies of every notarization in my personal files. Still have them in my basement. Give me your lawyer's contact." Dee's strategy was surgical. We'd attack on two fronts simultaneously. First, the probate court. We'd file an emergency petition to invalidate the POA based on Mom's incapacitation and request an immediate injunction preventing any transfer or encumbrance of the Edgewater property. The medical records from her surgery would be crucial. Dee had already subpoenaed them from Rivergate Medical. Second, the corporate angle. Delaware corporate law requires disclosure of all related party transactions, Dee explained. Using family property as collateral without proper board disclosure? That's a breach of fiduciary duty. Every board member who signed off could be personally liable. But we needed the official deed from county records. The copy in the book was proof of existence, but for court, we needed the filed version. Dee sent her paralegal to the Hillside County Records Office. 2 days later, we had it. The original deed of gift, filed and stamped, recording book 2847, page 591. "This is beautiful," Dee said, holding the certified copy. "See this language? Separate property of Marin Ellison, not subject to any marital estate. Your grandmother paid extra for an attorney to make this ironclad." We spent a week preparing. I gathered every piece of evidence while maintaining my normal routine, pretending nothing had changed. Roy grew more arrogant by the day, openly discussing the Riverside Loft's groundbreaking, bragging about the family fortune he'd built. Dee introduced me to a forensic accountant who traced the loan documents. Roy had borrowed $2.3 million against the lake house through Tri-Coast Bank, then used that as leverage for another $5 million from institutional investors. The entire Riverside Lofts project was built on the fictional ownership of my property. "When this comes out," the accountant said, "Tri-Coast will call the loan immediately. Without that base collateral, the whole project collapses." We also discovered Roy's fatal mistake. In his rush to use the lake house as collateral, he'd filed a fraudulent deed transfer claiming Mom had inherited it from my grandmother. But the probate records showed Grandma's estate had closed with no mention of the property, because she'd already gifted it to me. Mr. Lowell provided the final piece. Not only did he have copies of the notarization, but he also had notes from his meeting with my grandmother. She specifically said she was bypassing her daughter to protect the property from any future husband's greedy hands. It's like she saw Roy coming. By the end of the week, we had a 40-page filing ready for court and a package for Halpert Development's board that would detonate Roy's career. Dee had even reached out to a contact at the SEC's Enforcement Division who was very interested in corporate fraud involving interstate banking. "The timing is crucial," Dee said at our final strategy meeting. "Once we file, Roy will go nuclear. You need to be ready. I thought about Mom, still recovering, still trusting the man who'd systematically stolen from us. What about my mother? She doesn't know any of this. We file for a conservatorship simultaneously, Dee said. Temporary protection while she recovers. My guess is once she's off the medication and sees the evidence, she'll want Roy prosecuted herself. Everything was in place. The court filings were ready. The board packet was prepared. Mr. Lowell was scheduled for a deposition. The only thing left was to light the fuse. Next board meeting is Thursday, I said. They're voting on the final financing package for Riverside Lofts. Dee smiled. Perfect. We'll file Wednesday night and serve the board Thursday morning. By the time they convene, Roy's empire will already be crumbling. Wednesday night, I worked my shift as usual, but my mind was on the packages being delivered across town. Dee had filed our emergency petition at 4:47 p.m., just before the courthouse closed. By morning, process servers would deliver copies to Roy's office, the Halpert Development headquarters, and each board member's home. I'd prepared my own surprise for the Thursday board meeting. Using my hospital's computer lab during break, I created a presentation that would leave no room for doubt. Slide 1. The deed of gift, highlighted and magnified. Slide 2. Roy's penciled notes from page 214, showing dates and amounts. Slide 3. A timeline correlating Mom's surgery and medication schedule with the POA signing. Slide 4. The fraudulent deed transfer Roy had filed. The final slides showed the web of loans built on the stolen collateral, each one a separate count of fraud. Thursday morning came faster than expected. I'd taken a personal day. Telling my supervisor I had a family emergency, it wasn't a lie. At 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. Dee texted. Served. Roy got his at 7:45. Board packets delivered to all 12 members. By 8:30, Roy was calling my phone. I didn't answer. He called Mom next. I could hear her confused responses from the kitchen. What do you mean? Emergency filing? What property dispute? I intercepted Mom in the hallway. We need to talk, I said, guiding her to the living room. About Grandma's lake house. About what Roy's been doing. Her face crumpled as I showed her the evidence. The gifts she thought she'd inherited. The papers she'd signed while medicated. The loans Roy had taken using my property. I thought I was helping our family, she whispered. He said consolidation would protect us. He lied, Mom, about everything. At 9:45, Roy stormed into the house, his face purple with rage. You vindictive little bitch! Do you have any idea what you've done? I've told the truth, I said, standing between him and Mom. Something you're incapable of. He lunged forward, but stopped when he saw my phone recording. The board meeting is at 10, I said calmly. I'll be attending as the legal owner of the Edgewater property. Dee Park will be representing my interests. You can't. Actually, I can check Section 7.4 of your corporate bylaws. Any party whose property is used as collateral has standing to address the board. Your own rules, Roy. The boardroom at Halpert Development was a study in barely controlled panic when we arrived. 12 middle-aged men in expensive suits clustered around the mahogany table, voices raised as they waved the morning's delivered packets. Roy sat at the head, trying to project control. Gentlemen, this is obviously a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? David Kelly, the lead independent director, held up the packet. Roy, this says you've been using property you don't own as collateral. Property that belongs to, he looked at me. Your stepdaughter? Dee stepped forward. My client has prepared a presentation that will clarify the situation. I connected my laptop to the conference room system. As the first slide appeared, the deed of gift in all its notarized glory, the room fell silent. 3 years ago, my grandmother gifted me the Edgewater Lake House. I began. 2 months later, my mother married Roy Halpert, this March. While my mother was recovering from surgery and under heavy medication, Roy obtained a power of attorney and used it to fraudulently claim ownership of my property. Click. Roy's handwritten notes filled the screen. These are Mr. Halpert's own calculations, showing when and how he planned to leverage my property for corporate loans. Click, the timeline appeared. March 12th, Mom signs POA. March 15th, Roy files fraudulent deed transfer. March 18th, Tri-Coast Bank approves a $2.3 million loan against the Halpert family's Edgewater property. One of the board members was already on his phone. Jim, it's Paul. We need you in the Halpert boardroom. Now, bring the loan documents. I continued through the slides, each one another nail in Roy's coffin. The room grew colder with every revelation. By the time I reached the final slide, showing how the entire Riverside Lofts financing structure depended on the illegally leveraged lake house, 2 board members had already walked out. This is preposterous, Roy sputtered. The property was part of the marital estate. No. Mr. Lowell's voice came from the doorway. He'd arrived with another lawyer, one I didn't recognize. I notarized that deed myself. Eleanor Marsh was crystal clear. The property was to go directly to Marin, protected from any future marital claims. The unfamiliar lawyer stepped forward. Thomas Chen, outside counsel for Tri-Coast Bank. We received notice this morning of the ownership dispute. He looked directly at Roy. As of 9 a.m., all loans secured against the Edgewater property are under review. If the collateral is invalid, we'll be calling the notes immediately. The boardroom erupted. Members shouted over each other, some demanding Roy's resignation, others calculating their personal liability. Through it all, I kept my eyes on Roy, watching his empire crumble in real time. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed at me. "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided to steal from my family. I just showed everyone the receipts." The boardroom descended into chaos. David Kelly slammed his palm on the table, calling for order. "Motion to enter executive session," he announced. "Roy, you need to leave, now." "This is my company." "Not for long," another board member muttered. As Roy stood, his phone buzzed. His face went white as he read the message. "The State Corporate Commission?" Dee smiled. "Oh, did I mention? We also filed a complaint about undisclosed related party transactions. They're very interested in your loan documents." The next hour was a blur of legal maneuvering. While the board deliberated behind closed doors, Dee worked her phone, coordinating with the probate court. At 11:47 a.m., she received the call we'd been waiting for. "Judge Martinez issued the emergency injunction," she announced. "Effective immediately. No transfers or encumbrances can be made on the Edgewater property, and," she smiled wider, "Roy is ordered to stay away from your mother pending a full hearing on the POA validity." Mom, who'd been sitting quietly in the lobby, suddenly straightened. "He can't come home?" "Not until the court reviews everything," Dee explained gently. "The judge takes financial elder abuse very seriously, especially when medication is involved." The boardroom doors opened. David Kelly emerged, looking haggard. "Ms. Ellison, the board has voted, effective immediately. Roy Halpert is suspended as CEO pending a full investigation. Marcus Webb from legal will serve as interim chief." Behind him, I could see Roy arguing with 3 men in suits, the company's internal legal team, from the look of their panic. One kept repeating, "The SEC doesn't play games with fraudulent disclosures. Roy, we need to self-report before they—" "Additionally," Kelly continued, "the board formally recognizes your ownership of the Edgewater property and deeply apologizes for any corporate actions taken regarding your asset without proper authorization. Our legal team will cooperate fully with your attorneys to unwind any improper transactions." It was corporate speak for, "We're sorry, please don't sue us into bankruptcy." By afternoon, the dominoes were falling fast. Tri-Coast Bank formally called their loan, giving Halpert Development 30 days to repay $2.3 million or face foreclosure proceedings. Without that base financing, 2 other lenders pulled out of Riverside Lofts. The project died before the first shovel hit dirt. I drove Mom to the Edgewater Lake House as the sun set. She hadn't been there in months. Roy had told her it was being renovated for rental income. Instead, we found it exactly as Grandma had left it, down to her reading glasses on the side table. "I can't go back to that house," Mom said quietly, staring at the lake. "Not after what he did." "You don't have to," I said, pulling out my keys. "I had a locksmith meet us here. These are for the new locks. This is your home now. Well, technically mine, but you know what I mean." She laughed, a broken sound that turned into tears. "Your grandmother would be so proud. She never trusted him, said his smile was like a shark's, all teeth, no soul." I helped her settle into the master bedroom, then went out to the porch. My phone had 17 missed calls from Roy, each voicemail more threatening than the last. I deleted them all and blocked his number. Dee called as darkness fell. "Update from my SEC contact. They're opening a formal investigation. Turns out this isn't Roy's first rodeo. They found similar patterns at his previous company in Arizona. He left just before charges were filed." "Will he go to jail?" "Depends on what else they find. But at minimum, he's finished in construction. No bank will touch him. No board will have him. And the divorce will be brutal. With that POA invalidated and proof of financial abuse, your mom will take him to the cleaners." I thought about the blue cloth-bound book sitting on my childhood bookshelf, holding secrets for 3 years. "Good," I said. "Let him lose everything." "There's more," Dee continued. "The board wants to settle. They're offering to unwind all transactions related to the Edgewater property, plus a significant sum for inadvertent corporate malfeasance. Translation: they'll pay you to not sue them into oblivion." From inside, I heard Mom on the phone with her old financial advisor, the one Roy had forced her to fire. She was taking back control, one conversation at a time. "Set up the meeting," I said, "but I want one condition in any settlement." "Name it." "Roy's personal assets get frozen pending the investigation. No golden parachutes. No transferring money offshore. He doesn't get to run." Dee chuckled. "I like how you think. Consider it done." I hung up and walked to the bookshelf visible through the window, where the Tides of Westbrook sat in its new home. Tomorrow, there would be depositions and court hearings and corporate negotiations. But tonight, my mother was safe in my grandmother's house, our house, and Roy Halpert's empire was collapsing under the weight of his own greed. All because he hit me for reading a book. The emergency court filing triggered a cascade of legal actions that moved faster than Roy could counter. Within 48 hours, Judge Martinez had not only upheld the restraining order but expanded it, freezing Roy's access to all jointly held accounts pending investigation of financial abuse. "The court finds sufficient evidence of exploitation," Dee read from the order as we sat in my mother's new kitchen at Edgewater. "All marital assets are hereby frozen pending full accounting and determination of rightful ownership." Mom had transformed in just 2 days. Off the cocktail of anxiety medications Roy had convinced her doctor she needed. Her mind sharpened. She'd already hired Diane Reeves, reportedly the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. "I found more," Mom said, sliding a folder across the table. "Credit cards in my name I never knew about, loans against my retirement accounts. He's been bleeding me dry for years." The corporate fallout was equally swift. Marcus Webb, serving as interim CEO, discovered the rot went deeper than anyone suspected. Roy had been using company funds for personal expenses, hiding them in construction costs. The Riverside Lofts disaster was just the latest in a pattern of financial manipulation. Friday morning brought the killing blow. The SEC announced a formal investigation into Halpert Development's financial disclosures. By noon, 3 major investors had pulled out of all projects, and the company's credit line was frozen. I was changing the locks at the lake house when Kara called from the hospital. "You need to see the news," she said. "Channel 7. I turned on the television to find Roy being led out of Halpert Development in handcuffs. The crawler read, "Local CEO arrested on federal fraud charges." "Federal?" I called Dee immediately. "Wire fraud," she explained, triumph in her voice. "He used interstate banking to move the fraudulent loans. The FBI doesn't mess around with that. Also, remember that Arizona connection I mentioned? Turns out he fled an investigation there too. Pattern of behavior across state lines. The irony was perfect. Roy's obsession with control, with documenting everything, had created a perfect evidence trail. Every email, every transfer, every forged document led straight back to him. That evening, as I helped Mom organize her reclaimed financial documents, she pulled out a small key. I found this in Roy's desk when I went back for my things. Safety deposit box at First National. We should tell your lawyer. I already did. We're opening it Monday morning with a court officer present. She paused. Marin, I'm sorry for not seeing it, for letting him. Stop, I said firmly. He's a professional con artist. This wasn't your fault. The weekend passed in a blur of legal conferences and moving trucks. We relocated everything important from the main house to Edgewater. On Sunday afternoon, I stood in Roy's abandoned study, looking at the bookshelf that had started everything. I pulled out The Tides of Westbrook one last time from his shelf. As I did, another paper fluttered to the floor, one I'd missed before. It was a letter from my grandmother, dated a week before she died. My dearest Marin, if you're reading this, then you found the deed. I hid it where I knew only you would look, in the stories of our family's past. The lake house is yours, protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of your mother's trusting nature. Guard it well. Some men see kindness as weakness, and I fear your mother may attract such a man. The water remembers all secrets. The house will keep you safe. All my love. Grandma Eleanor. My hands shook as I read her words. She'd known. Somehow, she'd seen this coming and protected me from beyond the grave. Monday morning brought the final revelations. The safety deposit box contained everything: offshore account numbers, evidence of tax evasion, and documents showing Roy had done this before, twice, in other states, each time marrying wealthy widows and draining their assets before moving on. Your mother would have been victim number 4. Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit told us. We've linked him to similar schemes in Arizona and Nevada. He changes his name slightly each time. Roy Harper, Roy Halberg, now Roy Halpert. The federal prosecutor took over the case, armed with evidence of a serial financial predator. Roy's bail was set at $2 million, money he no longer had access to, thanks to the asset freeze. As we left the federal building, Mom stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. We're getting the house back, she said. Everything he stole, we're getting it back. It doesn't matter, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. We have Edgewater, we have each other, that's all we need. That night, I carefully placed The Tides of Westbrook on the bookshelf in my room at the lake house. The blue cloth binding caught the light from the setting sun, and I thought about Grandma Eleanor, planning even then to protect us. Roy had beaten me for touching that book, never knowing it held the very weapon that would destroy him. He'd built his empire on our foundation, never realizing that foundation could be pulled away as easily as opening an old cover and finding the truth inside. I ran my fingers along the spine one last time, then went to help Mom cook dinner in our kitchen, in our house, where no man would ever again mistake our kindness for weakness. The courtroom was packed for the final hearing. Media, investors, former employees of Halpert Development. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of Roy Halpert. I sat with Mom and Dee in the front row, our evidence boxes neatly arranged for presentation. Judge Martinez entered at 2 p.m. sharp. This is a hearing on multiple matters. The validity of the power of attorney dated March 12th, the rightful ownership of the Edgewater Lake property, and the emergency petition regarding asset disposition. I've reviewed extensive documentation from both parties. Roy sat at the defendant's table, diminished. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders. His attorney, no longer the prestigious Barton and Pierce but a harried public defender, shuffled papers nervously. Mr. Lowell, please take the stand. Our elderly neighbor walked forward with dignity, his retired notary credentials lending weight to every word. Eleanor Marsh was completely lucid when she executed that deed of gift. She specifically stated she wanted her granddaughter to have the lake house, free from any future marital claims. I've been a notary for 43 years. I know competency when I see it. The medical records were presented next. Dr. Patricia Hendricks testified via video link. A patient on this combination of post-surgical medications, Percocet, Ambien, and Xanax, would absolutely lack the cognitive capacity to understand complex legal documents. In my professional opinion, obtaining any signature under these conditions would be unconscionable. When Dee presented the financial evidence, the forged deed transfers, the fraudulent loan applications, the systematic draining of Mom's accounts, the judge's expression grew increasingly stern. "I've seen enough," Judge Martinez announced after 3 hours of testimony. "My findings are as follows. First, the power of attorney dated March 12th is hereby declared null and void, obtained under circumstances that constitute elder abuse and financial exploitation." Mom gripped my hand as the judge continued. Second, the court confirms that the Edgewater Lake property, located at 445 Shore Drive, is and always has been the sole property of Maren Ellison, as evidenced by the valid deed of gift from Eleanor Marsh. Any attempts to encumber or transfer this property were fraudulent and are hereby reversed. Third, given evidence of systematic financial abuse, all marital assets are to be returned to Diane Ellison's sole control immediately. Mr. Halpert is ordered to provide full accounting of all transactions within 7 days. Roy's lawyer tried one last objection. "Your Honor, my client's business interests are no longer relevant to this court." Judge Martinez cut him off. "Mr. Halpert, you are furthermore permanently enjoined from contacting either Ms. Diane Ellison or Ms. Maren Ellison. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration." She raised her gavel. This court also notes that criminal charges are pending in federal court for wire fraud, interstate fraud, and financial elder abuse. Mr. Halpert, you built your empire on a foundation of lies and exploitation. That empire ends today. The gavel came down with finality. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Ms. Ellison, how does it feel to have won?" I thought about Grandma Eleanor's letter, about the bruise that had led me to the truth, about the book that held our salvation. "Justice feels like coming home," I said simply. The epilogue wrote itself in the following days. Halpert Development filed for bankruptcy within a week. Roy's hidden assets were discovered and seized. Nearly $8 million stolen from his victims across 3 states. He was ultimately convicted on 17 federal counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Mom flourished in her freedom. She rebuilt her financial portfolio, reconnected with old friends Roy had isolated her from, and even started dating a retired professor who treated her like gold. The Edgewater house became our sanctuary, just as Grandma had intended. I kept working night shifts at the hospital, but now I was saving for medical school, something I'd never dared dream about under Roy's shadow. The settlement from Halpert Development's board, combined with recovered assets, meant both Mom and I could finally build the lives we wanted. On quiet evenings, I still pull The Tides of Westbrook from the shelf, running my fingers over its blue cloth binding. Inside, pressed between pages 213 and 214, I keep Grandma's letter and a photo of the 3 of us, 3 generations of women who refused to be victims. Roy thought he could beat me into submission with one blow. Instead, that violence opened a door to justice he never saw coming. He forgot the cardinal rule of keeping secrets. Never hide them where a curious reader might look. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge comes not from violence or anger, but from simply opening a book and finding the truth written inside. The lake house stands strong against winter storms, just as we stand strong against those who would try to tear us down. And in the end, that's the greatest revenge of all, not just surviving, but thriving in the very place he tried to steal. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own experiences and perspectives mean the world to me, and I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's yours.